The house of my parents has always been a safe haven, but that weekend, when they decided to take an impromptu trip, the place that used to be my sanctuary became an unexpected source of terror. On Friday night, I bid them farewell with a smile, looking forward to a weekend alone. After all, I was 17 and more than ready to have the house all to myself. However, as the night progressed, a strange sensation began to settle in. On Saturday morning, I woke up with the feeling of being watched. Opening the curtains of my room, I found the neighbor from across the street staring intensely at me. A shiver ran down my spine, but I shook my head, trying to dismiss the unsettling feeling. Throughout the day, the neighbor stood at his door, as if watching every move I made. I felt like prey being observed by a predator. At night, as I tried to fall asleep, I heard footsteps inside the house, and yes, I made sure to lock all the entrances before lying down. I spent hours motionless in bed, the inexplicable sounds echoing through the empty hallways. It must be my imagination, I repeated to myself, trying to ignore the growing paranoia. On Sunday, I noticed the neighbor was not in his usual spot. A momentary relief washed over me. Perhaps he had lost interest. However, at night, while trying to relax, the heavy atmosphere in the house seemed to intensify. The sounds of footsteps echoed again, this time closer, and I could hear the creaking of a door as well. Fear settled in deeply, but I dared not investigate. On Monday, my parents returned, and the feeling of security returned, pushing the bizarre events of the weekend to the back of my mind. However, on Wednesday, the sinister atmosphere returned in full force. The police were at the neighbor's house. Fear took hold of me as I watched the authorities enter and leave the house. The smell of death lingered in the air, and a sense of dread seized me. I knew something terrible had happened. As the news spread, I discovered that the neighbor had been murdered on Saturday or Sunday, exactly when the strange events occurred in my house. A chill ran down my spine as I imagined the killer passing by my door while I remained vulnerable and alone. The trauma of that weekend haunted my thoughts. Every creak of the house, every inexplicable sound, revived the fear I experienced in those days. I could never again feel comfortable alone at home. Every time I looked at the neighbor's house, now empty and silent, a sense of horror took hold of me. The security I once knew had been irrevocably lost, replaced by a persistent paranoia that still torments me to this day. In June of this year, I took a significant step by moving out of my parents' apartment. Finally, I secured a stable job and yearned for a sense of freedom. After searching for affordable apartments in the city, I found one just 2 or 3 minutes walk from my parents' residence. It seemed perfect. I would live alone, yet still be close enough to visit them whenever I wanted or share a breakfast. The apartment itself is cozy, though nothing extravagant. However, for a single man, it is more than sufficient. The layout is marked by a long hallway, with my front door at the beginning. My room is the second on the left, but due to thin walls, I can clearly hear the sounds of neighbors in the building, whether walking, talking, or anything else. Last week, after a night at the bar with some friends, I returned home around 10:15, not too late. As I was off the next day, I took the opportunity to take a shower and settle into bed to watch Netflix. Around midnight, I heard a faint knock on the front door. I paused the program and remained silent for about a minute, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I resumed watching, but again heard 2 distinct knocks on the door. I got up, went to the door, and looked through the peephole, finding only darkness. I ignored it again and returned to the room, but before sitting down, I heard a slightly louder knock. At this point, I thought my friends were playing a prank, so I called one of them and asked if he was knocking on my door. He paused for a second and replied, "Dude, I'm at home, I need to wake up around 7:30. I believed him, hung up the phone, and speaking loud enough to be heard another knock. Irritated, I went to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. I unlocked the door, peeked out, closed and locked it again. Driven by anger, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking. I spent 10 minutes silently staring through the peephole before getting startled when someone placed their hand over it and knocked again. Immediately, I started unlocking the door and ran into the hallway. I heard fast footsteps going down the stairs and stopped behind the corner, with the sound of a coat brushing against the wall. I ran a few steps before realizing that the person was waiting behind the curve to surprise me. I rushed back inside and called the police. They arrived in a few minutes, searched the building and the street, but found no one. They said it might just be a prank by kids and warned never to chase after someone. They kept a patrol car in the area overnight, and the knocks stopped. It might have been just a foolish act by kids, but what sent shivers down my spine was the fact that the person went down the stairs and stopped behind the curve, not continuing to run. If they were just playing around, I believe they would have fled outside. It's been a week, the knocks have stopped, but for a few days, every entry into my apartment was done cautiously, expecting the unexpected. However, so far, nothing has happened, despite the constant feeling of being watched. In the past few months, I've experienced disturbing events in my city apartment. The occurrence of inexplicable phenomena has left me perplexed, and consequently, I've decided to share this experience. Initially, I noticed unusual noises in the building's hallway, footsteps and creaking doors that, at first, I interpreted as my imagination. However, the sense of intrusion intensified, and personal belongings were in different places when I returned home from work. On one particular night, the hallway light flickered, and in a flash, I glimpsed a moving shadow at the end of the corridor. Although I tried to dismiss it, paranoia set in. Exacerbating the situation, when I invited friends to spend the night, we were subjected to strange noises and whispers, along with my apartment door opening without logical explanation, which garnered jokes at the time but terrified me inside. I didn't wait long and contacted the authorities. However, no irregularities were found in my residence. Neighbors claimed I worked too much, and yes, I found that very strange. Simultaneously, anonymous messages, filled with disturbing content, began arriving on my phone, fueling a constant sense of surveillance. Faced with these events, I made the decision to leave the apartment, seeking refuge elsewhere. However, the atmosphere of apprehension still lingers, indicating that, for now, there is no plausible explanation for the events that unfolded. In the beginning, everything seemed normal in our new house. My wife, Carla, and I were excited about the move and the idea of starting a new life. However, that excitement began to fade when the first letters arrived. They were anonymous letters, silently left in our mailbox. At first, they seemed like trivial messages, things that could be known by anyone observing us. But as the days passed, the content became increasingly personal, revealing intimate details of our lives that no one but us should know. Initially, we thought it was a tasteless prank, perhaps someone from the neighborhood having fun at our expense. We ignored it, trying not to let it affect our peace of mind. However, the letters started to become more threatening, as if the writer was closely watching us, aware of our movements and intimate secrets. One night, returning home, we found a letter on the doormat. It detailed our routine for that day, from the moment we woke up to the places we visited. A chill ran down our spines, realizing that we were dealing not just with a curious observer but someone very disturbed. We decided to reinforce home security, installing additional cameras and locks. But the letters continued to arrive, despite our efforts to prevent access to our privacy. The messages now included direct threats. One night, while going through the Daily Mail, we found a letter that reached a new level of horror. It was a detailed warning about an event that would occur in our house that very night. It described every step we would take, every reaction we would have, as if the author was anticipating our immediate future. Paranoia took hold of us. We looked at each other with suspicion, questioning whether the other could be capable of such macabre acts. Fear infiltrated our home, and every shadow made us shudder. That night, some things predicted in the letter began to happen, like the power outage exactly at 7 p.m. A sense of imminent horror hung in the air. The terror became palpable. I thought I heard footsteps running through the house in the dark, but the light soon returned. I called the police, but they found nothing, suggesting it might be a neighbor who lived nearby, someone not in their right mind. Even today, we look back and wonder who was behind those letters. I don't believe it was a lunatic. The paranoia persists, and the shadow of that macabre experience remains with us. My name is Isabella, I'm 27 years old, and I live alone in a modest apartment on the 4th floor of a quiet building. The routine has always been the same: work during the day, a few hours of leisure at night, and occasionally, crossing paths with my neighbors in the hallways, exchanging brief greetings. Everything changed when a new resident moved into the apartment next to mine. A middle-aged man, of ordinary appearance, but there was something about his gaze that unsettled me. I can't say whether it was the intensity of his stare or the way his eyes seemed to fixate on me when we crossed paths in the hallways. The first few days were normal, but over time, I began to notice that he always appeared wherever I was. If I went out to get the mail, there he was, stepping out of the elevator. If I went downstairs to have a coffee in the common area of the building, there he was, flipping through a newspaper. The feeling of being watched grew with each encounter. Concern began to set in. I adjusted my schedule to avoid crossing paths with him, leaving and returning from work at specific times to avoid any contact. The tension in the building increased, but I preferred to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just my paranoia. However, the atmosphere of fear became palpable when, a few weeks later, the police showed up at the building. I came home from work to find police cars parked in front of the building, lights flashing, and a group of neighbors whispering among themselves. I approached Donna Mary, an elderly lady from the 3rd floor, who was outside, observing the commotion. She always knew the building's gossip. "It seems they finally got that man from the apartment next to yours, dear," she said. "What happened?" I asked, my nervousness increasing. Donna Mary sighed before responding. "They say he's a serial killer. He killed some women. The police found pictures of them in his room. Horrible pictures, Isabella." We're all shocked. My stomach sank at the news. I would have never imagined that my strange neighbor could be involved in something so terrible. The scene before my eyes was surreal. The police carried boxes of evidence, neighbors observed in silence, and there I was, trying to process the horror I had practically lived under the same roof. That intense gaze, that feeling of being observed, now made sense in a way I would have preferred not to understand. The following days were difficult. The news of the killer in the building spread quickly, and reporters swarmed the area for details. I avoided leaving my apartment, trying to preserve my privacy amid the chaos. I couldn't help but wonder if there was any picture of me in that apartment. The thought of being the target of that disturbing gaze made me shiver. However, the police had confiscated all the evidence. Over time, residents began to return to their routines. I, however, remained disturbed for a long time. Every time I left the apartment, I looked around, half expecting to see him, half fearing that his eyes were still fixed on me. Donna Mary, sensing my distress, became my confidant, a comforting presence amid the turbulence. She shared stories, comforted me when she could, and slowly I let go of the paranoia. After a while, I moved. I found a job elsewhere and relocated. Today, this incident is just a memory, but I confess that I still get worried when someone stares too much at me. I am a 23-year-old woman. This story takes place during the summer before my second year in college. I was on a mission to find an affordable place to live near campus, but all the nice apartments were beyond my budget. It soon became clear that I needed a roommate to share the burden of rent. So, I posted an ad explaining my situation. Surprisingly, within an hour of posting the ad, I received a response. The sender was an older lady in her 70s. Initially, I had hoped to share the room with another student from my university, but I decided that as long as they were willing to split the rent, it didn't matter much. Besides, I hadn't received any other responses over the next week. When the school semester started, Dorrit and I moved into our new place. She introduced herself as Dorrit, a short lady with white hair. She was a bit reserved but seemed friendly enough. I imagined we would coexist without many issues. However, in the first few weeks, I rarely saw her. We exchanged small talk in the kitchen from time to time, but mostly, she kept to herself, spending all her time in her room. Occasionally, late at night, while I was watching TV in the living room, I heard sharp laughter coming from her room. At first, I thought she might be on the phone or something, but I realized I never heard her talk, only laugh. I couldn't figure out what she was doing, and that laughter was eerie, like that of a small child, perhaps her daughter if she had one. Things took a bizarre turn as time passed. Dorrit started coming out of her room just to watch me. She would stand in the kitchen or the hallway, silently observing me as I watched TV or prepared dinner. It was unsettling, and I felt increasingly uncomfortable around her. One night, around midnight, I was awakened by a light tap on my bedroom door. It wasn't the type of knock to get my attention but slow, gentle, and barely audible. I called Dorrit's name, and the tapping immediately stopped. I was sure it was her, as I heard the same laughter followed by her footsteps moving away to her room. This incident left me quite shaken, as I didn't have a lock on my door, nothing to prevent her from entering my room while I slept. I couldn't sleep for the rest of that night. I planned to confront her about the situation the next day, but she never left her room at night. Concerned for my safety, I moved my desk in front of the door as an improvised barricade, given the lack of a proper lock. It wasn't a foolproof solution, but it was the best I could do. Unfortunately, that sense of security didn't last long. 3 hours later, I was awakened by the sound of my desk being pushed by the door of my room. Someone was trying to open it. It was Dorrit. I could see her eye peeking through the crack in the slightly open door. Before I could react, she started screaming and banging on my door. My desk began to give way, so I got out of bed and helped close the door myself. The screams and knocks continued for what felt like an eternity, and when they finally stopped, I immediately called the police. Upon their arrival, I cautiously opened the door of my room, and what I saw horrified me. Every knife from our kitchen had been thrust into the door of my room. Trembling with fear, I explained the situation to the 2 police officers and led them to Dorrit's room. She resisted being detained but ended up being taken away by the police. The following month, I moved to a different apartment, this time with classmates from my university. To this day, I can't comprehend what drove Dorrit to act that way. My best guess is that she had a severe and untreated condition for which she wasn't taking medication. But then again, who knows? Perhaps she had genuine intentions of harming me while I slept. Fortunately, thanks to my precautions, I never had to find out.